I am still sick. I apologize for coughing spasms intermittently through here. Today we are, excuse me, continuing the week on political communication in the media with the hopefully seeming up-to-date lecture on media effects, different disinformation in the media age. I kind of ground this in where the scholarship is at right now with all of this. Um, Now, keep in mind, it takes a while to do political science, so the scholarship, even the most cutting edge stuff, is a few years out of date. So hopefully this is general enough that you guys accept the principles that I talk about in this. But before we do that, yes, curated flows. Thank you so much. So they introduced this idea of curated flows that does basically what Anna said over there. So curated flows describe how political information reaches citizens in a social media era. Before, there was much less choice. There was more of a monoculture in what people experienced. But now, because there are fewer gatekeepers, as in like your news station or your media broadcaster that is keeping people from seeing certain things, uh, digital communication produces a hybrid system of how people receive information, um, largely mitigated by three forces. Platform algorithms, we talked about those last class, right? Algorithms are not impartial things. They exist because conflict equals attention, attention equals profit, right? Then you have social networks, your peer networks, who you're talking to, right? If you're a part of a online community, if you're truly ancient, basically deceased, and you're a part of a Facebook group, that could be a kind of social network. But who you follow on Instagram in their scroll informs who they now recommend to you in that feed, since they no longer just show you who you follow. And finally, user agency. You do have choice in this, despite the kind of curated way that this is meant to set off your dopamine receptors. They also talk about algorithmic personalization a lot. So it tailors content to prior behavior, which optimizes your experience through engagement rather than accuracy. If in the 1960s Walter Cronkite, ask your grandma who Walter Cronkite was, went on the news and said, some outlandishly false thing, it would end their career. Now that is not the case, because falseness also equals more engagement. We're going to talk about that in this lecture specifically. And also, it's important to note that individual choice, who you follow, who you click, who you spend any amount of time on the feed, reinforces these effects, which creates kind of a feedback loop. It's the same thing, you're scrolling through TikTok. If you spend a second too long on a video or something that you don't really want, say you're like, I don't know, mindlessly scrolling while brushing your teeth because you have a really unhealthy habit of doom scrolling, and you're like, okay, I gotta rinse out my mouth now and spit my toothpaste in the sink, and you end up spending 2 seconds longer on some kind of video, you're just gonna get tons of those videos recommended to you. That's bad, actively. So curation can be a good thing in an abstract sense. Curated flows can personalize your experience on these media platforms, right? So maybe you are a part of a historically minoritized group, and the mainstream media doesn't necessarily speak to issues that are relevant in your community. Curated flows can help get you the information that is most relevant to your life a lot quicker than it could before. But this can also be a bad thing. This creates echo chambers and polarization, and also selective attention. It is hardwiring your brain to pay attention to things that you are already interested in, rather than teaching you to be patient through things that don't instantly interest you. So let's dive into the content here. This lecture doesn't just examine how media institutions transmit information, like the last lecture was, but also how they shape political behavior and belief in information. There's going to be some review here. The review is on topics that are definitely going to be on the exam, so pay attention. We're going to move from structural institutions of media much more towards the consequences that these institutions have in the modern era. We talked about print journalism and broadcast journalism and digital media and kind of like this hierarchical timeline where one develops into the other before. And in this one, we're going to see the so what of it. Where does this leave us? It doesn't leave us anywhere good. It's a very uplifting and hopeful lecture. By the end of the session, I hope you guys understand both the theoretical foundations in the literature here of media influence, as well as the challenges to maintaining truth in a modern era here. This is not just a process that is negative because like we talked about last class, where there's like these profit motives and all of this, but also because beyond the underlying big question I gave you guys, what is or does absolute truth exist, but rather this idea that it doesn't matter if absolute truth exists if people are able to have curated flows that lead them into different subgroups that have their own truth. So let's talk about the foundation of media effects here. There's this idea of agenda setting theory. It comes from McCombs and Shaw. This is different from Mayhew agenda setting in Congress. And it proposes that media attention makes issues salient. It makes them relevant for people to pay attention to. Priming, then, affects how citizens evaluate leaders. And then finally, framing structures how issues are understood. I have a picture here. This is Laura Ingraham of Fox News. She notes that in some parts of the country, it seems like the America we know and love doesn't exist anymore. That is framing right there, right? These are Americans of the heartland talking about how what they love, what they believe in, what they see as America just doesn't exist anymore, and that is going to make them think about politics a certain way. The image of a farmer in a cornfield, that's priming, right? You're thinking about a certain way of life. This is a hard worker that she's talking about here. And that sets the agenda then for the news coverage, for the talking points for them. Together, these theories demonstrate that media influence operates not only through persuasion, but through cognitive accessibility. You don't notice what they're talking about, but your brain does. This is a good note here for potential essay question on the final exam. Media shape what people think about, how they think about it, and which considerations are most accessible. So, we have competing theories, as we always do in political science. There's this initial theory of media malaise, where overexposure to media basically relates or creates negativity and discourages political participation. If you see puppies burning in a building every Friday night on the news, you're just going to stop watching the news because nobody wants to watch puppies dying in a house fire. There's a scholar, Pippa Norris, who comes back and she refutes this with this idea of the virtuous cycle. And it shows that that in competitive democracies, news consumption actually increases trust and engagement. You get to see what different people in the political world are about, and you get to take that information in, and you feel informed as a person. And because you have information, and information is power, you can go out and exercise your role in American democracy. Yeah. She says that rather than depressing citizenship, media can energize it when audiences are active interpreters rather than passive consumers. And the whole point of this is that it hinges on the content quality, the institutional context, and audience predispositions. So this first idea of the media malaise, she says, too broad. It's not taking into account these contextual factors. So I think that these theories both have good grounding in them. Like, you guys can all relate to the idea of like being overstimulated by news constantly. I do it to you twice a week, every week, and I'm sure you guys are learning to love it when I sit up here like a drug counselor in a Dare ad. But like, also the virtuous cycle thing is a good thing. We already talked about when you guys have debates with your friends, it feels better when you are both correct and win the argument, right? One makes the other sweeter. So when you have the information, you feel empowered, right? As we all win. Yes, we all win debates in this room here. We're winners. So let's talk about the elite here. Let's dive into framing a little bit. Simon and Jarrett demonstrate that elite language, and we'll talk about examples of this, guide both media coverage and public opinion. Let's think about the abortion debate here. People who are on the pro-life side of things will often use the term infant or baby specifically when talking about the fetus, right? People on the pro-choice side of things will use the term fetus when talking about the baby or fetus, right? Those two words have subtly different connotations when talking about the issue here, and that frames you to think about this issue in a different way, right? It's using language to make you feel a certain way. Again, you didn't notice it, but your brain did. Rather than neutrally guiding debate, the press frequently amplifies elite discourse. You will see news headlines that will say, so-and-so says, and then it'll be in quotation marks, or it'll just be a quote or whatever, and it'll be this inflammatory thing. Because a headline will get people to click on that if it is some inflammatory statement. They are institutionally incentivized to do these things. These framing effects illustrate the deep interconnection between political communication and public reasoning. What people say matter because communication constitutes the reality of politics for most people. I have this sentence in my dissertation: rhetoric makes reality, and I truly believe that. So this phrase, a new era of minimal effects, comes from a 2008 study. You don't need to know the author's name, but if you're curious, it's Bennett and Iyengar, that describe a new era of minimal effects, where the abundance of choice in news outlets fragments audiences and shields individuals from counter-attitudinal messages. That was a very lofty way of saying that you guys have a lot of choice of where to get information now, other than 3 main news channels. And because you can choose where to get your news, you are less likely to come across information that goes against your already existing beliefs. This isn't just echo chambers where people are saying the same things to each other. You just might not experience information that is out there and truthful, but your chosen outlet doesn't want to report. Unlike earlier minimal effects literature that shows that minimal effects are driven by social conformity, today's effects are stemming from self-selection. Citizens opt into echo chambers that confirm what they already believe. Given choices, given a holistic view of the information ecosystem that is out there, people will still choose to go with what is comfortable and what they know over experiencing the whole of the truth. People don't recognize that central truth that we have established here, that in a debate, being correct and winning the argument makes it sweeter. They just want to win the argument. This slide is a bit of review, but I think it's important. We talked about motivated reasoning before, but we're going to dive back into it. Even when citizens encounter balanced information, cognitive biases dictate how they absorb that information. People interpret facts through the lens of their identity, through their emotions, and through their ideology. If I gave everyone in this room the same news story that you knew in your heart of hearts was factually correct, we would still have different interpretations of what that means because everybody in this room has not lived the same life and does not have the same values. As a result, misinformation persists not because people lack access to facts, but because those facts conflict with their worldview. Even given facts that are irrefutable, if it conflicts with what you already believe, you will not, 9 times out of 10, accept that as truth. And of course, partisanship is a big part of this. That is the ideological component of this. So, because of how human psychology works, and because of these network incentives, both in terms of the institutions giving out this information, these institutions of media, as well as the social networks that you are a part of, peer networks, misinformation and false information spreads more rapidly than true information. This is because false information, being false, is often new. Being false information, you can construct a narrative around it that leverages people's emotion easier. And also, misinformation is easier to target people in certain social groups, right? It speaks to you. This is the attention economy that I'm talking about here. Again, conflict equals attention equals profit. Bit of media literacy here for all of you. If something is false, it is misinformation. If something is intending to do harm, that is malinformation. Malinformation can be true, but it can be directed towards people to hurt them. Donald Trump and the Epstein files. Man hung out with a bunch of sleazy people. Man probably did bad things, has been found criminally liable for rape. Directed by his political opponents at him, that is malinformation. It is directed to do harm. That doesn't mean it's false. The combination of falseness and intent to do harm is disinformation. Disinformation is malicious. Misinformation is not inherently malicious. You can be incorrect without intending to hurt people. Fake news! I promised you guys at the beginning of this class, I don't know if you remember, that I would never do a Donald Trump impression. I will hold to that. So I show you this image, I say the phrase fake news, and everybody can hear him saying it in your head. Fake news. Recent experimental research on fake news and disinformation shows that corrections on fake information really doesn't work consistently. When people are given fake information, cued by a trusted elite source, if you trust Donald Trump, and then you correct that information by saying, hey, that's not true. Might not actually work. They might choose to just be like, hey, whatever. I don't want to believe the first thing. And that's especially true when identity is threatened. Identity threat is a deceptively complicated part of the behavioral literature. Identity threat isn't some kind of active, like, you're a Democrat, I'm gonna shoot you in the head. That's not what that is. It's an internally felt kind of like cringing behavior when you are given information that makes your identity group look bad, right? Republicans don't like when they are given information that maybe Donald Trump is a sex abuser because they have grafted on that is the leader of their party, right? There's an insecurity in that. Democrats during the Clinton administration didn't really like the whole Monica Lewinsky scandal thing because they were like, but we're the party of the people, it makes us feel bad, right? A good example of this too is along racial lines, right? The O.J. Simpson trial in the 90s, there were a lot of members of the African American community who initially were defended O.J. Simpson because he was another black man who was ostensibly being targeted by an unfair justice system, right? That is identity threat. They feel a threat to their collective identity because there's an attack on an individual member of their group. So this works with misinformation and disinformation too. If someone says, what Donald Trump said is false, and you're a Republican and you believed what he said, you might not accept their abundance of evidence on the other side because you feel a threat to your identity. Because if he's lying about this, what else might he be lying about? This is the same thing. You saw this with centrist Democrats during the Biden administration. Man was clearly demented and old. And you had all these Democrats saying, no, he's fine, because there was a threat to their party that they felt. Does that make sense? Right? Okay. While digital literacy can help with this, teaching people how to find out what's true and what's false, media literacy stuff, effective polarization limits its effectiveness. Remember, effective polarization. This idea like, I don't like this other party already just because they are of this other party. The challenge isn't then just simply to identify misinformation, but to confront why citizens choose to believe it. There are psychological processes going through people's heads that explain why they chose to believe QAnon so much to the point that they stormed the US Capitol. There is something going on there beyond the fact that they are just, conservatives or hate Democrats. There is something psychological happening there. Research on attention and digital media shows that anger drives sharing and visibility. To a group of young people, this should not be surprising. Getting angry online is like breathing. It's just what happens. And this has been a thing since forever. But, we have a gerontocracy, and old people still fall for that stuff. So, it's great to be in America. Emotional incentives distort public discourse, and they replace deliberation with reaction. This is where I think there is a tension in the free speech absolutist community of discussion, right? That online people should be able to say whatever they want because we have free speech in America and we should be able to debate those things. The issue is, it's under this guise, their side, is like, this is deliberation in a democracy. You can say what you want, you can express yourself as you want, but it's not, it's provoking reaction. And reaction and deliberation are not the same thing. Deliberation has a notion with it that it is in good faith, and also that you are there to actually learn something from it, right? If I have a political discussion with someone about something, I hope to learn something from them. I hope they hope to learn something from me. If I'm just yelling at my crazy uncle at the Thanksgiving table about something in politics, that is just reaction. That's not deliberation. Long gone are the days of Cicero. This leads to the fact that misinformation then is both contagious and self-sustaining. Its success lies in its ability to capture attention, not in its truthfulness. There's this idea, Gresham's law of political communication. Low-quality information crowds out high-quality content. There is more of it, it is more attractive, and it just hits something in our heads where, like, I want to react to that right now because it makes me really angry. Libs of TikTok. Who is familiar with Libs of TikTok? Yeah. She finds your stereotypical blue hair leftist who's like, my pronouns, you have to respect my pronouns, in like a really like cringy way, right? I have a nose ring, I can make fun of these things. And like, she spreads that out to her followers in a lot of ways who are really conservative people because she knows it will make them really angry. And then like those people can then dox those blue-haired leftists and attack them online and make their lives a living hell. And she says she doesn't do this, but like multiple journalistic studies have found that like the people that she targets, like their lives are like ruined after this. She's really good at doing that. It's a really weird compliment to give someone, but she's really good at manipulating the attention economy in a really like vindictive and reactionary way. Very media savvy person. Probably not a fun person to hang out with though. Media effects in a networked world. What does this lead to then? The structure of influence has flattened. By that, I mean before, historically, in the times before 2007 when Steve Jobs pulled an iPhone out of his jean pocket, you had the elite at the top. And this is like, the president or the CIA or who's a famous celebrity from the before times? Arnold Schwarzenegger. How did you know I was going to say Arnold Schwarzenegger? Okay, Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? And they do something or they say something, and that gets curated down to your networks, right? Or your traditional media, and that's like your New York Times or your ABC, your CBS, your NBC, your Wall Street Journal, etc. And then, can you read that? Is that too low? Is the podium in the way? I know you guys can up front, but like you guys chose to sit there. So, it goes down to normal people, plebs. They then get that information and they're like, wow, Arnold Schwarzenegger, his muscles are bigger. Whoa! It used to be vertically integrated. Now media is much more horizontal. That's peer-to-peer communication in groups. What does this mean for politics, though? It might be good for democracy, right? Maybe the CIA, maybe Arnold Schwarzenegger, and maybe the president, maybe they're lying to you. And you need verification that they're telling you the truth. And you before had to rely on the fact that the nerds at the New York Times were doing their due diligence. But now you have people like libs of TikTok and other people. Who was the guy in the AI video that Donald Trump dumped diarrhea on? He's on the left, Harry Sisson or something. The No Kings video, where he flew over the city and dumped diarrhea? The guy that he dumped diarrhea on was like a real dude. He was like a left-wing influencer. Yeah, Harry Sisson. Yeah. You have those people. It might be, good for democracy. It's average Joes like you and like me. But also, that's kind of bad, too, because what are my qualifications to give you information about how big Arnold Schwarzenegger's muscles are? The metaphor is getting away from me. The shift decentralizes persuasion, but increases vulnerability to misinformation. There is more information, there is less ability to validate that information. The boundary between mass and interpersonal communication also used to be very clear. You knew if Walter Cronkite was on your TV stand giving you information about the moon landing, that he was speaking to you as a news anchor. Now, if you're scrolling through TikTok and you come across, like, the guy who, like, I get this guy sometimes. He does, like, gay news, but he always seems to be having a panic attack about it. You'll find him eventually, I'm sure. He has very glossy skin. He, like, comes in and he's always having a panic attack, and that's what he does. He does news, ostensibly, but, like, also it's who he is, right? Walter Cronkite before used to, like, go in his car and go home, and if you were talking to him at the bowling alley, he was not giving you the news, right? But now, everybody is an influencer. Everybody has a brand. Everybody has some kind of curated online platform that they talk about things in. And so we don't know if people are speaking to us as a political actor or if people are speaking to us as a trusted informant on information, right? You might think you can tell the difference, but your brain can't. So, what are the takeaways here? Another crazy infographic from the New Yorker. Actually, this one might be the Atlantic. Media no longer simply mirrors politics, but structures it. And you could say that this has always been the case. But remember, we used to have this kind of vertical integration. Now that it is horizontal, all the elites need to look down for their cues. Understanding modern political communication requires bridging classic media effect theory with the realities of digital misinformation and algorithmic influence. Democracy depends on shared truth and credible communication, and we don't really have either of those anymore. happy days are here again.